In the quiet, sun-drenched neighborhoods of El Paso, Texas, life often seems to move at a slower pace. It's a city built on community and family, where neighbors are meant to look out for one another. On Hawley Circle, a residential street tucked into the central part of the city near Fort Bliss, this was the everyday reality. The homes are modest, the lawns are kept, and the people are just living their lives. But on a Monday afternoon in February 2026, a single call to the police shattered that normal, exposing a dark and unthinkable tragedy hiding behind one of those ordinary doors. It's a story that defies any easy explanation and leaves you wondering how well we can ever know the people next door, or even those in our own homes. What happens when a lifetime of quiet existence ends in a moment of shocking violence? And what could possibly drive a 91-year-old woman to kill? To her neighbors, 91-year-old Ann Crawford Fritz was just a sweet, elderly woman. But on February 9th, 2026, a horrifying discovery would change that image forever, and was found dead not as a victim, but as a killer. She had taken the life of her own son in a tragic and shocking final act before taking her own. What could possibly drive a 91-year-old mother to murder? The answer, it seems, is buried in a story of quiet desperation and hidden secrets. The 2400 block of Hawley Circle is an unassuming street. It's the kind of place you could find anywhere in America, a collection of single-family homes that have seen generations grow up. This is where 91-year-old Ann Crawford Fritz and her 68-year-old son, Morgan Fritz, lived together. To the outside world, their lives were incredibly private. There were no public signs of trouble, no reports of loud arguments, and no history of police calls to the house. They were simply a mother and her adult son, living out their years under the same roof. And at 91 was in the twilight of her life, an age where most people are cared for, not feared. John, at 68, was a senior citizen himself, an age where he should have been enjoying a peaceful retirement. An adult child living with an elderly parent isn't unusual. It's often a situation born from necessity, love, or some combination of the two. In many cases, the child becomes the caregiver. In others, they might rely on their parent for a place to live. The truth is, we just don't know the specifics of the Fritz household. Public records and initial reports gave no glimpse into their daily lives. In a world of social media and constant connection, they were almost invisible. This privacy might have been a comfort in life, but in death, it became a frustrating veil. The question for police wasn't just what happened inside that house, but who Ann and John Fritz really were. The afternoon of Monday, February 9th, 2026, was completely unremarkable until a neighbor picked up the phone and asked the police for a welfare check on the Fritz home. Police haven't said exactly why that neighbor called. Maybe the mail was piling up, or the curtains had been drawn for too long. Whatever the reason, it was enough to spark concern. When officers from the El Paso Police Department arrived at Hawley Circle, they had no reason to expect what they were about to find. But upon entering the home, they were met with a grim and final scene. Inside, they discovered two bodies. Both had been shot. The home was immediately secured, and what started as a welfare check quickly became a homicide investigation. The initial label was suspicious deaths, a standard term for when the circumstances aren't clear. For days, a heavy cloud of uncertainty hung over the case. The police were tight-lipped, only confirming that two people were dead and that the public wasn't in danger. This is pretty typical as investigators piece together evidence without wanting to compromise the case. For the community, though, it was a week of anxious speculation. Was it a home invasion? A double suicide? Was there a killer on the loose? The truth, when it finally came out, was more shocking and tragic than almost anyone could have guessed. On February 17th, a full 8 days after bodies were found, the El Paso Police Department finally broke their silence. The suspicious deaths were officially ruled a murder-suicide, and the details were stunning. Investigators had determined that 91-year-old Ann Crawford Fritz shot and killed her 68-year-old son, Morgan Fritz. After killing him, she turned the gun on herself. How do you even begin to wrap your head around that? It's hard to reconcile the image of a 91-year-old woman, likely frail and in her final years, with the cold violence of a killer. We hear heartbreaking stories about caregiver burnout or younger relatives harming their elders. But an elderly parent killing their own adult child is incredibly rare, a true psychological puzzle. With that announcement, the who of the investigation was solved. The case was contained within those four walls and within the tormented mind of Ann Fritz. The question was no longer who, but the much more complicated and haunting question of why. Police simply stated they were continuing to look into the circumstances of the incident. But with both Ann and John gone, the full truth may have died with them. When a case like this surfaces, one that seems to defy all logic, we often look to experts to try and understand what might have happened. Now, we have to be clear. What follows is not based on any specific evidence from the Fritz case, because none has been made public. Instead, this is an exploration of common themes and similar, though very rare, family tragedies. One of the most cited theories in murder-suicides involving the elderly is the idea of a distorted mercy killing. This can happen when a person comes to believe their loved one is facing some kind of unbearable suffering, physical, mental, or financial, with no way out. In a distressed and often depressed state of mind, they may develop the delusional belief that ending the person's life is an act of compassion. They then take their own life out of despair. Was John Morgan Fritz secretly sick? Was the family facing financial ruin? We don't have answers to those questions. Another possibility centers on a reverse role of caregiver burnout. If and dependent on her 68-year-old son for care, and maybe his own health was starting to fail, she could have felt profound hopelessness about her own future. The fear of being alone, of being put in a facility, or becoming a burden can lead to extreme, irrational actions. There's also the idea of a suicide pact that went wrong, but investigators ruled this a murder-suicide, which suggests the evidence pointed to a unilateral act of violence by Ann. Without a note or testimony from friends or family, we're left to guess what dark currents pulled this mother and son under. In the end, the story of Ann and John Fritz just leaves you with a profound sense of sadness. It's a stark reminder that behind any closed door, on any quiet street, there can be a universe of unknown struggles. The final image is one of almost incomprehensible tragedy. A mother and son who lived together for years, dying together in the most violent way, with one killing the other. The investigation officially concluded that Ann Fritz was the perpetrator, but that legal conclusion does little to explain the why. What were those final days and hours like inside the house on Hawley Circle? Was there a final conversation, an argument, or just a quiet, grim resolve in the mind of a 91-year-old woman? These are the questions that will likely haunt that home forever, and questions we'll probably never get answers to. The Ann Crawford Fritz case is one of the most perplexing and heartbreaking stories in recent memory. What are your thoughts on what could have led to such a tragic outcome? Share your respectful opinions in the comments below. And if you find these deep dives into the human stories behind the headlines compelling, please consider subscribing for more.